For most of the world, the Iran war has been a rude awakening to the realities of modern conflicts. In late March, the New York Times claims that several American military bases in the Middle East had been hit so extensively that they were, quote, all but uninhabitable. Oil refineries and fields across the region and a critical liquefied natural gas facility in Qatar have been devastated in waves of Iranian drone and ballistic missile attacks. Iran has hit radar installations, hotels, and high-rise buildings, threatened targets as far as the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, and even destroyed one of only a handful of the deployable copies of America's E-3 Sentry, one of the most important military aircraft on Earth. Across the Middle East, air defenses have intercepted the vast majority of incoming attacks, but when an adversary can attack, with dozens or even hundreds of projectiles at a time, intercepting the vast majority just isn't enough. A small handful of world nations had learned these lessons before everybody else, and the undisputed world leader in modern drone warfare just happens to be willing to share its secrets for the right price. That nation is Ukraine, and right now, Ukraine is working overtime to provide protection to the Middle East wherever possible. For Kyiv, this partnership doesn't come without a cost. The nation's drone operators and its air defense experts are desperately needed on its own front lines, where Russia is trying to create progress in a creeping spring offensive. But if Ukraine can pull this off and enhance Gulf state security while holding the Russians at the front, then the rewards could be extraordinary for all sides. Now, if we're going to understand the solution that Ukraine is working to provide for the nations of the Persian Gulf, we've got to start with an understanding of the problem that the Gulf states are facing. In a word, or really two words, that problem is air defense. Iran is not a nation with very much traditional offensive capability. Even before the Middle East conflict of 2026, Iran's ground forces were not able to project power beyond the countries with which Iran shares a land border. Iran lacks strategic bombers or an air force capable of gaining air superiority against any modern adversary, and its navy was mostly an afterthought. Instead, Iran relied on a combination of high-arching ballistic missiles, maneuverable cruise missiles, and long-range kamikaze drones to attack its adversaries, and its practical limitations went beyond the variety of its arsenal. The missiles and drones that Iran did have also lacked range, and certainly they lacked the range to hit the United States. Instead, when the US came to the Persian Gulf this year to try and assert dominance over Tehran, the Iranian regime responded by targeting any nearby nation that was both within its range and was valuable to the United States and Israel. The nations of the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and others took the brunt of the attacks, which mostly focused on their ability to extract energy resources like oil and natural gas, process those resources, and export them across the globe. Of course, the Gulf states were fully aware of the value of those assets before the war ever started, and in urgent warnings to Washington before the war began, they attempted to explain the risks to American leadership. The United States either wasn't convinced or wasn't concerned, but when the war began, those Gulf state warnings were proven entirely accurate. To prepare for such an eventuality, the nations of the region had stockpiled a variety of air defense systems to shoot down incoming drones and missiles, and in the weeks leading up to the outbreak of war, the United States complemented those air defenses with additional systems that they'd flown in from across the globe. The US also concentrated air defenses across over a dozen of its own bases across the region, several of which are close to major urban centers or economic targets. Now, to be clear, the deployed air defense systems across the Persian Gulf are all quite good at what they do, but they suffer from a few limitations at once. First, different air defense systems are meant to deal with different types of threat. A system built to intercept ballistic missiles cannot deal with low-flying drones, or vice versa. Second, air defense systems are costly, and they are much more costly than the drones and missiles that Iran was relying on. Iran might spend, say, $50,000 to produce a copy of its highly effective Shahed 136 drone, but if an American Patriot air defense system locks onto that drone and shoots it down with an interceptor missile, even successfully, then that missile will cost the US or its allies over $4 million. The US and the Gulf states are much wealthier than Iran, of course, and for that reason, the extreme cost disparity might be acceptable in cases of limited conflict. But when Iran is launching thousands of missiles and drones, it's a different story. And the third problem with modern air defenses also comes from the types of drones that Iran frequently relies on. Those drones aren't stealthy exactly, but they are equipped with limited stealthy features that make them harder to detect, and they fly at far lower speeds and altitudes than missile interceptors are built to intercept. For that reason, they're more difficult to positively identify as threats, and they have an easier time slipping through air defense systems under the right circumstances, especially when launched in swarm attacks. Problem number 4, every air defense system is limited by the number of interceptors that it can launch before having to reload. If a Patriot battery is equipped with a total of 32 PAC-2 interceptors, but it's trying to deal with a swarm of 40 incoming drones at once, then even with perfect accuracy, 8 drones are still going to get to their targets simply because the battery cannot be reloaded quickly enough. Even worse, interceptors started to run out quickly once the conflict began in earnest. To give an idea of the sheer volume of incoming fire that Gulf states were dealing with, interception counts from just the first 10 days showed that the United Arab Emirates had destroyed 241 ballistic missiles and nearly 1,400 drones. That's just a single country, across less than a third of the conflict's total duration. There are only so many interceptors available across the globe, and they can only be produced so quickly. America's best Patriot interceptors, the PAC-3, were produced at a rate of 600 per year when the conflict began, and America's high-altitude ballistic missile interceptor, the THAAD, was being produced at rates of roughly 96 per year. Those numbers can be increased substantially over time, and already the US has made the required investments to scale up production, but that process requires months to set up new production lines and years to replenish stockpiles while accounting for new demand. By mid-March, Gulf states were already telling Washington that they were having to pick and choose which targets to intercept to avoid running out completely. The US had to pull interceptors from Europe, the Indo-Pacific, and deep in its own reserves just to keep up with the sheer volume coming from Iran, and by the end of the conflict, reports from America, Israel, and several Gulf states indicated that the problem had gone critical. Now, in ordinary times, it would have been extraordinarily unlikely that the Gulf states would turn to an alternative arms dealer to place any bulk orders for new weaponry. After all, the oil-rich countries of the Arabian Peninsula are some of Washington's most faithful customers, as well as some of the best paying. But the destruction of the Iran war was far from ordinary, and within just weeks of the start of the conflict, Middle Eastern leaders had begun to reach out to one Volodymyr Zelensky. More than any other nation on Earth, including the United States, Ukraine has developed an extraordinary ability to fight long-range, attritional, drone and missile warfare. In its war with Russia, Ukraine has fought in an environment where the skies are simply too dangerous for manned aircraft on either side, and where drone technology has made up that gap. Because Ukraine doesn't have nearly the military budget of a major economy, even with foreign assistance, the nation has had to focus on finding low-cost solutions to a wide range of problems, and in most cases, drones have been their answer. Ukrainian drones are far and away the best in the world, prized for both the incredible range of designs that Ukraine has come up with and the rapid design and redesign process that has kept Ukraine at the bleeding edge of adaptation. On offense, Ukrainian drones provide real-time, constant monitoring of a vast front line, launching strikes or conducting kamikaze attacks in network swarms. But Ukraine has also adapted drones to serve in a dedicated air defense role, developing nimble interceptors that can take out incoming adversary drones as they approach. Because Russia relies so heavily on drone designs that have been adapted from Iranian base models, Ukraine is highly experienced in dealing with exactly the sorts of drones that Iran was launching toward the Gulf states, and its drone operators are immensely experienced in using those drones in fast-paced, full-scale conflicts. In short, Ukrainian drone technology was precisely what the Gulf states needed to fill the gaps in air defense support that Washington couldn't provide. The larger question, at least in the early stages, was whether Ukraine would be willing to give up its hard-won technology while it still had its own war to fight. Kyiv has banned the export of its defense equipment as well as its designs and component technology for years in an attempt to ensure that all of its resources were concentrated on Russia. Ukraine has very little money to spare, even less manpower on the home front, and next to zero capacity to send its best drone or air defense experts away from the front lines. But even despite Ukraine's manpower shortages, Kyiv announced on the 18th of March that the country had deployed 201 anti-drone experts to the Middle East to assist partner governments all across the Persian Gulf. Dozens more were already prepared to travel abroad at that time and have since been sent off to the region. According to Ukrainian President Zelensky, those operators were dispatched in teams to the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, and several other nations. Not only that, but Zelensky revealed that Ukraine had already developed excess production capacity, specifically in its ability to build drone interceptors. As of mid-March, by his own estimation, Ukraine was able to produce a minimum of 2,000 interceptor drones each day, but only half that number was required to defend Ukraine itself. Quoting Zelensky, "If a Shahed needs to be stocked in the Emirates, we could do it. If it needs to be stocked in Europe or the United Kingdom, we could do it." By the end of that month, Zelensky had traveled across the Middle East to work out arrangements for Ukraine to accomplish precisely that task. In Saudi Arabia, Zelensky held meetings with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and worked out a 10-year defense agreement that will allow Ukraine to exchange technology and expertise while paving the way for substantial investments and establishing a framework for future contracts. In Qatar, Zelensky signed a partnership arrangement to engage in, quoting Qatar, "collaboration in technological fields, development of joint projects, defense investments, and the exchange of expertise in countering missiles and unmanned aerial systems." Like the Saudis, Qatar's collaboration would focus mainly on instruction and technology sharing to counter missiles and unmanned systems. The United Arab Emirates followed suit with a similar agreement shortly afterward. In each case, many details were not disclosed, and others were left intentionally ambiguous. But Ukraine is known to be considering the prospect that it could build production lines on the soil of its Middle Eastern partners. By early April, Ukraine was engaged in discussions with Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman in pursuit of similar cooperative arrangements. All that despite the rumored frustration of the United States, where defense officials were reportedly rather upset with the Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia, for pursuing arrangements outside their relationships with Washington. Yet, as the Saudi Crown Prince purportedly reminded the United States, its defense decisions are a matter of Saudi national interests, and for both Riyadh and the other Gulf capitals, their national interests dictate that they pursue any arrangements that stop the attacks coming their way. Now, before we discuss the ways that this arrangement could benefit Ukraine, we'd like to take a moment to discuss Fronts.co, our team's premium website, written news outlet, and one-stop shop for global conflict analysis. It's back. I'm back in my old studio. We had some sound treatment done. It took a while. I hope it sounds good. Still dialing everything in. I'm also aware this lighting is fairly horrible. I'll also fix that. One step at a time. On Fronts.co, our team works with award-winning journalists and experts to provide key insights into the wars, flashpoints, and geopolitics that shape our world. Plus, we provide exclusive video episodes every single week, as well as our briefing room, a Saturday collection of under-the-radar stories from across the globe. Also on Fronts.co, we provide multiple free offerings each week, including our twice-a-week newsletter on world conflicts, WarFronts Weekly. Best of all, Fronts.co costs just $5 a month or $50 a year. Check out the site, do subscribe if you like what you see, and now, back to the Middle East. For the Gulf states, the advantages of a partnership with Ukraine are obvious. Kyiv possesses technical knowledge, experience, operational competency, and a purpose-built anti-drone arsenal that the United States and other nations cannot match. For Ukraine, the rationale may not be quite as obvious. After all, Ukraine has its own problems to deal with, and even if the country has interceptors or production capacity to spare, it's unusual that Zelensky and his government allies would drop everything to try and support the Middle East. But Ukraine's decision is motivated by a clear strategic calculus, not just to build goodwill with world nations or create a bit of good press, but to bring Ukraine closer to its own victory over Russia. First, there are the practical payoffs for Ukraine, including the actual compensation that Kyiv will receive for its efforts. Supporting the Gulf states is far from an act of pure charity, and the Gulf states know it. Instead, they've been more than happy to agree to resource deals with Kyiv in exchange for Ukraine's assistance. According to Zelensky, Ukraine will receive direct supplies of crude oil that will be processed in Europe, as well as processed diesel fuel that Ukraine needs urgently. In other cases, Ukraine will be receiving direct payments, allowing Kyiv to spend that money as it sees fit in support of its war effort. Zelensky has also indicated that the Gulf states may send types of air defense interceptors that are less useful in countering Iran, but that would be more useful to Ukraine in dealing with attacks against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Just as important as the payments made to Kyiv are the infusions that Gulf capital are providing for Ukraine's defense industry. By Ukraine's own admission, the country could be producing double the volume of military hardware that it currently manufactures, but it lacks the funds to make that happen. At first, the Gulf states will receive hardware that's already been built, or that will be set aside from Ukraine's current production lines, but after that, they'll be helping to create new production lines that Ukraine will still have access to long after the Gulf states' orders have been fulfilled. These deals are also crucial to Ukraine for strategic reasons. None of the Gulf states are a military powerhouse, but they're hardly irrelevant on the global stage. They're incredibly wealthy, they supply a high share of the world's energy needs, and they're highly influential all across the globe. Right now, Ukraine has a handful of consistent advocates on the world stage, concentrated mostly in Europe, but a wide range of other nations are either partial to Russia or are interested in preserving their place on the sidelines. Even nations that used to be much closer to Ukraine, like the United States, have recently become much more distant. If Ukraine can make good on its new arrangements with the Gulf states, then it'll be able to count on those nations' influence to advance Ukrainian causes and pressure other countries to work more closely with Kyiv. That's not simply a matter of goodwill either. If Ukraine is helping to keep the Gulf states safe, then it's in the Gulf states' interest that Ukraine is safe, stable, and free to produce the defense equipment that the Gulf states are counting on. The Gulf states need to do business with Ukraine, and the Russian invasion is clearly getting in the way. Then there are all the reasons that these deals hurt Russian interests as much as they help Ukraine's. For one thing, the Gulf states' postures on Russia and Ukraine respectively are mutually exclusive. If they get closer with Ukraine, then by virtue of the ongoing invasion, they're going to become more distant from Moscow. The Gulf states are very important to Russia as an enduring trade partner, a guardian of Russian offshore finance, a tourist, an investment destination, or a broker of Russian relationships with the rest of the world. Those relationships cannot continue as normal if the Gulf states form deeper relationships with the country that Russia's trying to invade. Meanwhile, a better military response to Iran by the Gulf states is a way for Ukraine to batter one of Russia's closest allies. Moscow has supported Tehran's war effort, built up its military, propped up its economy, and helped it to skirt sanctions for years. Russia has relied heavily on Iranian drone designs to continue its war with Ukraine, but today Iran relies just as much on Russian components to build its drones quicker and cheaper than it otherwise could have. As Zelensky explained it in March, quoting, "The regimes in Russia and Iran are brothers in hatred, and that is why they are brothers in weapons, and we want regimes built on hatred to never win in anything." End quote. Equally important, Ukraine is working to help the Gulf states find ways to support Kyiv without having to take a hard stance against Russia that might backfire. When Gulf states agree to supply Ukraine with cash rather than exchange some of Ukraine's military hardware for some of their own, that isn't an accident. Providing weapons to Ukraine directly would create immense friction with Russia, a relationship that Gulf nations aren't necessarily fond of, but one that they'd be very hesitant to blow up completely. Handing Ukraine money is a different story. The Gulf states are fully aware that the money will probably be used to support Ukraine's war effort, directly or indirectly, but once that cash is transferred to Kyiv, the Gulf states can wash their hands of the whole thing. Russia is welcome to start an argument over those payments. But if it did, then Gulf states might be inclined to reconsider other deliberately ambiguous arrangements, including ones that benefit Russia. Finally, these early agreements with the Gulf states are an ideal way for Ukraine to start down the path of a post-war arms exporter. When Ukraine's war against Russia eventually concludes, Ukraine will be the premier source of modern drones, and other countries will be very eager to get Ukraine's help in rethinking the ways they build production lines, adapt their technology in real time, and otherwise cope with the constantly changing nature of the modern battlefield. Already the Gulf states' eagerness to collaborate with Ukraine has set a helpful precedent, with other countries engaging more openly around post-war arms agreements than they'd previously done. In mid-April, Germany started work with Ukraine on plans to jointly produce advanced drones and other systems, with the apparent intent to cover a very wide range of drone and missile technology. Ukraine has also recently agreed to increase security cooperation with Syria, an unexpected partnership that's expected to bring Ukraine into far closer alignment with Syria's primary sponsor, Turkey. On the home front, Ukrainian startups are working to pivot toward international demand, with the company Farpoint, the designer of Ukraine's Flamingo cruise missile, now looking to create a new, cheap air defense system as soon as next year. The situation that Ukraine faces today is one that it never asked for. It's under invasion by a much larger, much more militarily powerful and economically potent adversary, and one that appears hell-bent on erasing Ukraine from existence, no matter the cost. But across several years of continuous conflict, Ukraine has proven able to adapt again and again to make the most of a painful and dangerous set of circumstances. For most of the world, the war in the Middle East has meant instability, energy shocks, and horror at the bloodshed across an entire region. And for Ukraine, the war has brought all of those problems too. But Ukraine has turned the Iran conflict into an opportunity, and as long as Ukraine can maintain its current course, it'll emerge from these chaotic few months in a stronger position than ever before. Thank you for watching.